Hey, what's going on, everybody? In this video, we're going to be doing my April wrap-up, and I didn't finish quite as many books as I did in the month of March, but I still managed to finish 11 books, and 2 of them were pretty crazy, and we'll go over those right now, so let's go over to the shelf and check them out. Alright, let's start with the craziest book first, and it is The Rise of Theodore Roosevelt by Edmund Morris, and this is obviously a presidential biography of Theodore Roosevelt. It came out in 1980, and it won the Pulitzer Prize for biography that year, and it certainly earned it. This was probably one of the best biographies I've ever read. It's actually the first part of a trilogy, and this book deals with Theodore Roosevelt's birth all the way through his tenure as vice president. And like I said, it was just an epic biography. It looks small. That is a 900-page book, about 100 pages of footnotes, and the type is fairly small, so even though it's a smallish book, it's still a decent-sized read, definitely, at about 800 pages of the actual narrative. So yeah, I'm really pleased that I read it, and I already picked up the second book in the trilogy, Theodore Rex, and yeah, I'm really pleased that I finished this book. It was kind of daunting at first, but it was just a pleasant read, tons of research, but still pretty easy going through the most part. Alright, for a fantasy book, I read Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb, and she's been recommended to me many times when asked for fantasy recommendations, and I did enjoy it. I'm still not a big fan of the whole assassin character type idea, I guess, but I really enjoyed that the book was well written in a first-person point of view, and this being the first one fantasy book that I've read that has a first-person point of view throughout the whole book. So yeah, I definitely enjoyed it in that aspect. I finished Cannibalism by Bill Shutt, and this was a buddy read that I did with Megan's Red Library, and I'll leave her link down below. And it was pretty fun for the most part. The book was divided between animal cannibalism and human cannibalism, with human cannibalism probably taking a little more than half of the book, but I enjoyed the animal cannibalism aspects of the book much more, to be honest. But yeah, it definitely went on tangents sometimes, but I definitely learned a lot, especially on the animal side of things. I'm trying to read at least one Oxford Very Short Introduction book each month on a variety of topics, and this month I went with The Earth by Martin Redfern. To be honest, it was sort of a run-of-the-mill very short introduction, but since I don't know too much about geology, honestly, it was still a pretty good read for me because I learned quite a bit, and the author did a very good job being concise, but also explaining the concepts that he was trying to explain, so I'm glad I read it. Also, I'm going to leave my full review of The Earth down below. And next up is A Brief History of Vice, How Bad Behavior Built Civilization by Robert Evans. And before I bought the book, I did not see the little description here, Robert Evans of Cracked.com. And yeah, as you could probably guess, this was just a psycho romp through many bad things that cultures have done, essentially, or habits that they do. And he basically did a little bit of history on whatever it was, such as, smoking like real tobacco, or making the first alcoholic beverages, or, eating fly agaric and stuff like that. And he basically has a how-to manual of how to basically copy the original ways of doing these bad things, and kind of why they're important. But to be honest, it sort of just got out of hand and got a little crazy. Considering the last whole chapter is on the fire salamander, which probably isn't even really a thing, to make salamander brandy, which is like a super alcoholic hallucinogenic drink, I guess. But anyways, like I said, it was a fun read, but it was pretty silly, to be honest. But a full book review will be forthcoming on all these titles. For a medieval history book, I read The Greatest Knight by Thomas Asbridge, and this is something of a biography of William Marshall of English history, and I'm really pleased that I read it. I didn't know too much about him, to be honest, but he basically goes through, there's a manuscript that was found, I believe, in the late 1800s, and he goes through that manuscript and then adds extra resources and research that he's done into the matter, and pretty much fleshes out an important medieval figure's life pretty much as best as possible as can be done. But yeah, it was a very fun read. I learned a ton of stuff. Plus, it does a great job setting the context that William Marshall lived in and described many of the events and cultural expectations and cultural events that occurred during his lifetime. I also read The Gladiators, History's Most Deadly Sport, and this is by, as I've been corrected, Fick Mayer, and he is a Dutch scholar, and this is a translation from the Dutch, but this was an excellent history book. If you enjoy either Spartacus or Gladiator, you should definitely read this book to find the truth of the matter of many of these things, and it deals with all aspects of the gladiatorial games, not just gladiatorial combat itself. And this includes, such as the executions that took place, and especially a lot of information on the beast fighting that also took place in gladiatorial arenas. But yeah, this was an excellent read. I think I gave it 4.5 stars, and I'm going to leave the link for the full review down below. For another animal book, I finished Other Minds, The Octopus, the Sea, and the Deep Origins of Consciousness by Peter Godfrey Smith. And this book deals with a philosopher's attempt to explain high-order intelligence and several cephalopod groups, such as octopuses, squid, and cuttlefish. And he uses a lot of his own sort of anecdotal evidence from his adventures scuba diving with octopuses in the wild, and he comes to many good conclusions. And this book deals is sort of a mixture of both biology and philosophy, though I felt that sometimes his argument for actual consciousness in these cephalopod animals was rather weak, but it was still a very enjoyable read just based on all his personal anecdotal evidence that he has compiled over time. I'll leave the full book review link down below. For an Osprey Publishing book, I've read Macedonian Armies After Alexander 323 to 168 BC, and this is in the Men-at-Arms series, and it's number 477, and that just shows you how many volumes they've put out over the years. But yeah, this was actually a lot better than the previous one that I reviewed earlier, and this actually does not deal with just the Diadochoi, which are the successors to Alexander. It literally only deals with the armies and military of literally just Macedon during this time period. This book deals with a short history of the time period as well as the arms and armor of the different soldiers in Macedonian armies at this time, how they came about, how they changed over time, and things of that nature, such as also how they were recruited and what their compensations were for serving, and all things of that nature. But this was an excellent read. If you're really into Macedonian history, you should probably check it out. Alright, now we're on to the second crazy, insane book that I think slowed me down a little bit. And this is Collision of Empires, The War on the Eastern Front in 1914 by Prit Buttar. And this is probably one of the densest books I have ever read, ever. Of all the history books that I've read, this literally deals with almost a day-to-day basis of what was going on between the German Empire, the Russian Empire, including chapters on the Serbia, and as well as the Austro-Hungarians, all along the Eastern Front during World War I throughout the year of 1914 from the beginning of hostilities. And he literally goes into the divisional and corps level of the armies, not just an army overview, which makes it a super, super detailed book. Sometimes it was so dense it really kind of just washed over my head, but he has lots of really good insights on why divisional or army or corps commanders did certain things and why they couldn't do certain things and things of that nature, and how even just smaller units can change basically the course of wars and win battles and such things of that nature. But an excellent read if you're willing to slog through a really dense book if you're interested in Eastern Front studies of World War I. Also, this is the first book in a 4-book series. And lastly, for another fantasy book, I finished The Thousand Names by Django Wexler, and this is the first book in a 5-part series known as the Shadow Campaigns, and I really enjoyed it. It's a work of flintlock fantasy, and an interesting spin on this one is that this book deals with basically a colonial outpost of a large empire. But yeah, there's magic, guns, and demons and things of that nature, and all mixes together pretty well, and it's told primarily through 2 points of view, and you really become endeared to those 2 characters. So I felt it was well written. There was a few minor issues I had with the book, but overall it was still an excellent read, and I encourage you guys to check it out if you've never read this series before, or you enjoy Flintlock Fantasy. You should definitely give it a chance, and I'll leave the full book review down below. Alright, and those are the 11 books that I finished in the month of April, and I'm pleased, even though I didn't quite get as many as last month. Like I said, the Theodore Roosevelt book and Collision of Empires were just super... Well, Collision of Empires was super dense and detailed. Like, it's literally a fairly large book, and the print is small. So even though I think it was only like 400 pages, it took me like twice as long to get through it. And also, the Theodore Roosevelt is literally just a 800-page biography. And even though it's well written, it's still 800 pages of biography, which I think would slow almost anyone down. But I also had some Roman history, a medieval history, some life science books, as well as a couple fantasy books. So yeah, overall, I'm well pleased with that, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you guys have any more fantasy suggestions, leave them in the comments down below. If you've read any of the books, also tell me what you thought of them. And always remember, read victoriously.